Good morning, all, and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to this, the third meeting of the Joint Select Committee, Social Services and Public Administration. This committee has oversight responsibility for education, health, gender, tourism, public administration, labor, culture, community development, and other social services. This is the committee's first public hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its inquiry into the effectiveness of sporting programs in diverting vulnerable youths from delinquency and criminal activity. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments on the Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube channel ParlView, ParlView, or via Facebook or X, formerly known as Twitter. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at TT Committees for real-time updates and highlights from committee meetings. Could I please ask the representatives from the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago, Sport TT, and the Ministry of Education to introduce themselves? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm working curriculum coordinator acting for physical education, sport, and leadership activities. Good morning, everyone. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. I'm Sharina Rama, Director of Leadership, Ministry of Sport and Education.
Good morning, Chair and members. My name is Khadijah, Director of Monitoring and Evaluation at the Ministry of Sport and Education.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, members. My name is Khadijah, Senior School Social Worker at the Ministry of Education. Good morning, Chair, good morning, members of the public. My name is Justin Matthew George, Head Sport Development, Sport Development for Performance Unit.
Okay, thank you very much for those introductions. This inquiry has 4 objectives. 1, to examine the design and administration of existing state-supported youth sporting programs, projects, and initiatives known as youth sporting activities in Trinidad and Tobago. Secondly, to examine participation rates of vulnerable youths in different state-supported youth sporting activities across Trinidad and Tobago, including factors influencing their engagement and retention. Thirdly, to evaluate the effectiveness of existing state-supported youth sporting activities in positively influencing the behavior, attitudes, and social development of vulnerable youths. And fourthly, to understand the issues and challenges adversely affecting state-supported youth sporting activities. May I please ask the following persons to make... Oh, I'm just being reminded. It's very remiss of me, sorry. My name is Desiree Murray. I'm Senator Dr. Desiree Murray, Independent Senator, and I'm the chairman of this committee. Apologies. So I then ask the other members of the committee to please introduce themselves.
Dr. Michael Dowlath, Minister of Education.
Ravi Ratiram. Ravi Ratiram, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Good morning all and season's greetings. Symon de Nobriga, member.
Okay, thank you. So I will now ask the following persons to please make brief opening remarks, maximum 2 minutes, please. Mrs. Penelope Bradshaw-Niles, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning again to you and members of this committee. This inquiry falls squarely under the remit of the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs as it involves the impact of sport on youth. The current mandate, as per the policy of the current government, includes for the youth portfolio focused intervention for at-risk youth, strategic reform for youth empowerment, and for sport, rebuilding a national movement of excellence, participation, and pride in sports. The Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs and the Sport TT will continue to work to ensure that the synergies required to have impact in both areas will be achieved. We look forward to the deliberations this morning under your distinguished leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradshaw-Niles. Mr. Claudel McKellar, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, my opening remarks were definitely going to go beyond 2 minutes because we really wanted to paint the context within which the ministry operates with respect to sport, but I'll try to manage the time.
Okay, I'll assist you by letting you ask one of our questions, so you'll have the opportunity.
Okay, the Ministry of Education remains steadfast in its commitment to empowering the national student population through a high-quality, inclusive, and forward-looking education system. At the core of this commitment is the holistic development of every learner, and of course the belief that every child can learn. And we ensure that students are not only academically prepared, but also physically, socially, and emotionally equipped to contribute meaningfully to national development. Education as advanced by the ministry extends beyond the classroom. It encompasses the development of essential life skills, positive values, discipline, teamwork, resilience, and healthy lifestyles. To achieve holistic development for all, the ministry has strategically included 9 core compulsory subjects to be studied at the primary school level, 14 at the lower secondary level, that's Form 1s to 3, 33 at the CSEC level, Form 4 to 5, and over 20 subjects at the CAPE level, Form 6. Physical education is notably a compulsory area for engagement at the primary level and the lower secondary. It is important to note that while physical education contributes to the identification and nurturing of sporting potential, the Ministry of Education's mandate is not the broader development of sport at the national level, but rather the educational development of students through physical activity and sport-specific skill acquisition. Chair, my team and I thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee and commit to responding to the best of our ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKellar. And Mr. Jason Williams, Chief Executive Officer of Sport TT.
Hi, good morning, members. On behalf of Sport TT, we are thankful for the opportunity to be here today to mention to you all, what we are doing in terms of partnership with the Ministry of Sport and, in some extent, the Ministry of Education for development of sport and sporting programs. As you will hear during the course of the deliberations, that we would have instituted a lot of programs over the last couple of years, and we plan to implement some programs coming from January as well, in partnership with Education and the Ministry of Sport to ensure that we have participants throughout the widespread geographical regions in Trinidad and Tobago. So we look forward to the questions today and to provide some answers to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Before commencing questions, I'd like to remind both committee members and officials to direct their questions and concerns through the chair, and remind members and officials to kindly activate the microphone on your devices by pressing the on-off button, and to turn it off when you've concluded your contribution. So we'll now proceed with the hearing. I'll begin the questions, please. My opening question is, for the enlightenment of the committee and the general public, could the Permanent Secretaries, Ministry of Education and Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, and the Chief Executive Officer of Sport TT please explain the difference in your respective mandates as these relate to youth sporting activities? Starting with the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. As I indicated in my opening remarks, all of with respect to physical education and sport, that portfolio falls under the Ministry of Sport, and also the remit for sporting infrastructure, as well as to the youth affairs. So we have three main areas under sport and youth affairs. That's sport. Then we have youth affairs, and then there's national service. Both national service and youth affairs deal really with the development of youth, and also infrastructure and programs which deals with anything related to youth affairs. So with respect to sports as well, the Sport TT is one of the bodies that fall under the remit of the Ministry of Sport as a state enterprise. So even in the development of the programs that Sport TT will be speaking about, that falls generally under the remit of the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs. So the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs will have sporting programs, youth programs, national service programs, as well as physical infrastructure projects for both sporting facilities and youth facilities, which will fall under the remit. So I hope that explains it.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, do you have anything to add?
Yes, just to go a bit further with what the Permanent Secretary would have mentioned, we develop programs from the primary school level all the way up to the elite athlete level. We provide sports sciences services as well to the elite athlete level, and we are responsible for stadium upgrade and maintenance, as well as development of local and corporation grounds to ensure that there's avenues for the athletes and the upcoming athletes to be able to use and train.
Thank you. Mr. McKellar.
Thank you, Chair. So just to reiterate the comment made in my opening remarks, that the Ministry of Education's primary remit is towards physical education training or learning opportunities for our students. And this is captured within the school curriculum at the primary and secondary level, particularly up to Form 5 for the CSEC students. While we recognize the importance and the value that sport plays in the overall physical, emotional, social development, character development of our students, we do provide opportunities for students to engage in competitive sports. And we have partnerships. There are windows of opportunity for collaboration between the Ministry of Education and the school's national sporting organizations, the SNSOs. And they play a critical part in the general offerings within the school education program. Within our professional staffing body, the faculty, we have physical education teachers, not sport teachers. We have curriculum officers, curriculum coordinators who are responsible for phys ed. And these are actually the persons who interact with the secondary school sporting organizations to facilitate programs like the secondary school football competition, intercol, the cricketing competitions, basketball, etc. But again, to reiterate, the Ministry of Education's primary focus is on physical education, teaching, learning, not necessarily sport development.
Thank you. Member De Nobriga.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, Chair. How do the ministries and the state agency interact with each other, whether it be in general or with specific programs that may be happening in schools, but are programs that are generated out of the Ministry of Sport and managed by Sport TT? So if you could give us an idea of how that works before we continue.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the ministry overall is responsible in terms of policy development and will set the general direction. Some of the programs will be managed under the sport ministry, our ministry directly, and through the Sport TT, they will implement a lot of the larger programs, and specifically, as Mr. Williams would have said, through the schools, right? So where there might be specific focus, so for example, the ministry itself has a focus with respect to sport, the impact of sport on girls and women. So you would see that there has been a campaign with respect to developing sports, specifically with a focus on girls and women. While some of the other programs that are run, the infrastructure with respect to sports, a lot of times the areas that the vulnerable youth might be living in, you'll find those communities as well. The Division of Sport, Physical Education and Sport will have specific programs and manage the facilities, ensure that they have the resources that are required to ensure success with those programs. And some of that will include, as we'll talk about, transportation and so on for the youth to ensure that they can get to and from the facilities, that they can be a part of the program. So I will turn over now to the director so that he could explain a little bit more about what the ministry itself, and then Sport TT will say what they do.
Thank you very much, Pierce, and again, good morning to Chair and all members of the committee. So, as Pierce would have alluded to, the Division of Physical Education and Sport at the ministry, we have programs that align to our national policy on sport. So they tend to take two main directions or two main overall themes, being the development of sport and sport for development. The sport for development aspect of the ministry's programs are what tend to guide directly to the topic that we're discussing today. What we would have had that would have since been changed with the new administration, but we would have had a Sport for Development and Peace unit, and that unit would have had that specific mandate of developing sport for development programs, especially in vulnerable communities. However, on the sport division side or the Division of Sport side, we do ensure that our programs are spread throughout the country, including Tobago, to try to ensure that vulnerable youngsters in rural areas do have access to the programs that we offer. So you'll find that a lot of the programs that we will have will touch spaces like Sangre Grande, Mayaro, Superior, Point Fortin, as the case might be, to ensure that as much as possible we can spread the access to our programs to those communities. Of course, many of our facilities are in areas that are considered at risk. So we have the community swimming pools in Laventille, in Mova, in Maloney, in Derby Malabar, and in terms of those communities that are considered at risk, we have those pools there. Of course, the pools exist in other communities. We have 10 overall, and we have indoor facilities in those various areas as well too. So, example, Maloney has an indoor facility as well. Mayaro has an indoor facility. So we try as much as possible to ensure that the programs that we run exist in those sporting installations and give the possible opportunities for persons in those areas to access sport.
But if I can interject, I mean, those programs exist, but based on your submission, a lot of them are under-resourced, and some of the community pools are not functioning, and there seems to be, even though the programs exist, the vulnerable youths are not necessarily accessing them for a lot of reasons that you described in your submission. And also, what the member was asking is how the ministries and Sport TT interconnect and collaborate with each other. So, you've already given us submission, so we're aware of all the programs that exist, but what we want to know is the impact of those programs, whether the vulnerable youths are accessing it, whether it's having the effect that we desire. So that's really what we are getting at. Okay, sure.
So as it relates to the interfacing between Ministry of Sport and Sport Company, many of the programs that we would put forward as it relates to some of the programs that would have been under the former Shaping Communities program, we will liaise with Sports Company as it relates to ensuring that there is a connection between what they are doing and ensure that there's no duplication in what we are doing as well. We do utilize the national governing bodies that are under Sports Company's purview as well as those under us, so that there is that relationship there in terms of ensuring that there's an overarching focus from the national level as it relates to the development of sport and sport for development. There would be, for example, the April Pools program, which is one of our more successful programs that we do at the community swimming pools and at those community swimming pools that are considered in areas of high risk. We do have a fairly high level of participation in those programs, and those programs.
That's one of the things we wanted to ask, because
really,
your definition of success is participation. But what about outcomes and whether any of these children go on to continue swimming as a sporting activity, and how really the April Pools program has impacted on whether they become delinquent or not in these high priority or high risk areas? Because based on your submission, only 4 of the 9 or 10 pools are actually functioning. And one of the things you also indicated was that the washroom facilities may not be up to standard for the females to participate in some of these areas. So
that would have been one recreation grounds we were mentioning in terms of general reasons why some vulnerable demographics are not able to participate as much as we would like.
Exactly.
So but that was more for recreation grounds. I mean, at the facilities that are under the ministry, those have fairly adequate restroom facilities.
So when you say the April Pools was a success, what do you mean? What do you mean by success?
Success in terms of accessibility, in terms of the number of persons who were able to participate, but also part of the success of the April Pools program is getting more people interested and understanding the value of learning how to swim as a life skill. And also part of the April Pools program relates to rescue skills, rescue and life-saving skills as well. So there is a level of capacity building that takes place at communities. In addition to that, the Mova, Maloney, and the W Malabar swimming pools, and of course Laventille swimming pools, those pools are manned by the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, by members of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force. And what has transpired at those pools is that we have been able to actually create the MOVA Swim Academy, which is affiliated to the Aquatic Sports Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And as such, you now have the possibility for persons from vulnerable communities to be able to have access to a swim club and be able to swim competitively and participate in national swim events. So that would have been one of the major impacts that would have come out of the April Pools program, and as an extension of that program, the Learn to Swim and Recreation Swim programs that exist at the various pools that we have and that are open. Yeah.
Did you want to follow up?
Well, I was waiting for...
Yes, members. So what we provide in terms of the synergies is, while our programs are not earmarked for the vulnerable specifically, we cover sport for all, and we try to do a geographical spread throughout Trinidad and Tobago. What we like to do, as we consider it, is to expand the base of participation of sport. We are not going after to find the next Brian Lara, but we are looking to try to get kids to gravitate towards sports and to be active and to participate. Over this year, actually, we would have implemented a Java cricket program over July-August period. We would have identified 2,433 kids coming out of that particular program and participating. And we have identified 155 of those who are a bit exceptional out of that, and they are now in an under 13 and under 15 program. What we have also done is, within the communities that we go to, we identify clubs that might be registered in those communities. So while we might not be able to provide everything for them, we link them to the clubs. And we sort of hand them over to the clubs and say, these are the exceptional talents, these are the kids that you all could further develop. We have also tried to upskill some of the clubs. Some of them are lacking in terms of administration. We have done some training with them to get them to a point that they could probably go to the ministry, apply for grant funding, and get things to develop themselves so that they could expand their base and develop the athletes under their base as well.
Chair, if I can just add one thing, that with respect to the swimming in particular, I just wanted to note that the swimming pools have programs running right through the year. So when someone starts to swim, they can continue at different levels and continue throughout the year. So that's another way in which they keep involved. So I just wanted you to understand that it's not just a one-off program. Program for Easter or April, and then it stops. So there's the opportunity to continue. The second thing is that what we are doing now, and we have the Director of Monitoring and Evaluation in the newly formed ministry. Sport and Youth Affairs is one that recently changed. And so some of the programs, because of when it was implemented, you would not have the long-term outcomes yet that we'd be able to give a definite result. But what we are doing right now is putting a stronger focus in terms of the monitoring and evaluation aspects. So maybe not today we can answer what's the impact, but maybe 12 months from now, we'll be able to see what impact those particular programs would have had. So I just wanted to point you to the fact that we are actively working on the aspects where we can say, what this program do for the community, what did it do for vulnerable youth, and so on. So just wanted to plug that in. Thank you.
Chair, if I might continue, a couple others.
Certainly, but just following up on the monitoring and evaluation, could you indicate the timeline for full implementation? You're saying within the next 12 months we'll have data?
So right now, and I can ask the director to speak, so particularly with the sporting programs, we, as we speak now, working on both the sport division is working with monitoring and evaluation in terms of developing a very comprehensive monitoring and evaluation. So if you would allow the director
Yeah,
just
certainly.
to give some.
And as part of his answer, Director, could you tell us if you have any preliminary outcome data?
Sure. Good morning again, everyone. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the approach the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit is taking for developing the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs Monitoring and Evaluation System, we have 4 phases. We started the first phase with the reconstruction of the ministry in October, where we engaged in training to ensure that everyone in the sports side understand what the monitoring and evaluation system looks like, what data we would like to collect. We also exposed them to the new portal that we're developing that would allow us to be able to have real-time data available on programs and so on. The second phase would be to do basically an assessment. So in terms of the preliminary data, we have asked both Sport TT and Sport to provide us with all the data that they have right now. What we have gotten is what you said, Chair, which is some participation data. We are trying to see if there are any trends where we can see there's an increase in participation rates. Preliminary and not without having gone in detail into the data, what we have observed is that there has been an increase in participation rates over the last 3 years in terms of young persons, women, and other beneficiaries participating in the programs of the ministry, but we haven't gone in detail. So in January, we already have set up the basically an M&E assessment of the data, the files, anything that the sports company and sport division has gathered, so that we can really get a true assessment of the outcomes and so on of the program. And then just in terms of ending and sharing, the last 2 phases would be to have operationalized the monitoring and evaluation system, and we expect that to begin in the second quarter of fiscal 2026 once the programs have begun. So that entails ensuring that every single program has a structured what we call the theory of change, which just allows everyone to understand the pathway we are trying to get to have an impact. So it's not just, well, we did the program, but to be able to provide a lot more results. And I think by the end of the second quarter, the system will be up and functioning, and I believe we will have some preliminary data in the second quarter to be able to showcase for the programs that have extended beyond just a one-off interaction, what has been the results.
Thank you. Would any of this information be collected from the national governing bodies?
Yes, because they do receive grants. So in terms of the grants, we do have a separate process that we'll be using, which is to basically find out those persons who have received grants, how they have utilized them, and then what benefits those grants have resulted in for the beneficiaries of the grants. So we would be including that as well, and it's also on our online portal so that our management team can have quick access to the data, and then we'll have the additional details in terms of what has actually contributed to persons moving on to competitive sports or moving on to elite athlete sports, as the chair said the CEO said for Sport TT.
Okay, thank you. I
Sure.
think Minister Ratiram had a follow-up question on the cricket camps.
Thank you, Chair. But before I go into the cricket camp, I just wanted to follow up when PS was speaking about the swimming pool programs, the community swimming pool programs. In the submission, these programs also aim to train and mentor children, which will satisfy the mandate's objective and aim to minimize the negative impacts of high-risk areas on today's youth. What sort of challenges has the ministry encountered in transitioning youth participation from the community-based programs into competitive clubs and structured pathway as outlined in the community swimming pool program objectives?
Yeah, I'll ask the director to take that.
All right, thank you very much for that question, sir. And one of the challenges that we have, and we're working with ASAT, the national governing body, on that, is, of course, the accessibility to competitive clubs. So competitive swimming does carry a fairly high cost, in terms of membership to clubs, in terms of the purchase of equipment, etc., to be able to participate at that high level. So that would have been one of the reasons why it would have been seen as necessary that coming out of the MOBA Swim Academy, or having the MOBA Swim Academy, to allow for that access to competitive swimming. And it's something that we would look to spread to other pools as the human resource capabilities are increased. We have done at the April pools level capacity building courses as it relates to swim instruction and competitive swim instruction. So the idea is to try to spread the ability for our community swimming pools to also offer competitive swim instruction. We're also even looking at introducing water polo as another avenue for which persons who learn to swim through our community swimming pools are able to engage in other sporting activities as well. So, so those are things that we have in train. The April Pools program, as I said, is or has a level of collaboration with ASAT. So we have been engaging them as it relates to how it is we can spread competitive swimming utilizing our community swimming pools.
These new initiatives, the water polo and the other initiatives you spoke about, we have a timeline that we're working with.
The water polo program is one of those programs that would have been approved recently, and we would look to implement that introductory program in the July-August vacation.
Okay, thank you. Director, moving on to the sporting programs, the cricket programs, Chair. So I want to move on to the sports company programs. In the submission, the current programs and initiatives within the remit of Sports TT are facilitated under the Sport Development and Performance Unit and the Community Sports Department. The programs highlighted were one, the Youth Sport Camp, the Easter Fundamental Motor Skills Camp, the Sports in Social Program, School and Community Cricket Coaching Program, and the I Choose Sports, I Choose Sport Community and School Caravans. Can Sports TT indicate how short duration camps are expected to sustain youth engagement beyond the program period, particularly for the vulnerable youths who may require consistent structure and mentorship?
Member, I'll defer that question over to our head of sport development, who is responsible for the execution of those camps.
Thank you, CEO. Through your chair, morning member. So, Chair, member, further to your question, the programs that we do, as the CEO pointed out early in his remarks, do not specifically target vulnerable youth in the way that the committee is inquiring this morning. However, as a derivative of the sporting programs that we put on, structured programs delivered over a sustained period, the understanding is that the adage of what happens with idle hands takes effect. So you now have these youngsters involved in set programs over a sustained period. The continuity of that program is ultimately what we aspire to, and our CEO pointed that out. It is a referral to clubs, a referral to the national governing bodies to ensure that, one, from a recruitment and development perspective, when they're introduced to the various sporting programs at the sport camp, they then continue at the club or national governing body level, depending on the availability to so do.
Thank you most kindly. And in your submission, you mentioned that the I Choose Sport Community Caravan in 2024-2025, the eligibility criteria used generally are geographic areas, age, gender, and schools and communities of focus. Can you advise the eligibility criteria relating to geographic location for participation in this program, including how communities and schools are identified and selected for inclusions?
Through your chair, member, is that on the I Choose Sport program or is it sport camps?
The I Choose a Sport, that was in the page 26 of the submissions.
Right. So member, for that I'll have to defer to my colleague.
Good morning again.
Am I on? Yes. So good morning again. I am Lindell Hoyt Sanchez, Head of Community Sport at Sport TT, with the responsibility for that I Choose Sport program. Okay, so the selection of the schools for the caravan, we would have used a list compiled by the Ministry of Education, identified as schools in need of focus. So we would have visited those secondary schools in need of focus with regards to executing the I Choose Sport program, which is more or less reintroducing sport to schools, to secondary school students, letting them understand the strength and the what sport can do, the benefits of being involved in sport and physical activity. So those were the schools there. The caravans, we selected the caravans based on geographical location for the various communities. With regards to the schools, we would have done 11 schools in Caroni, 7 schools in Port of Spain and environs, which would have been identified on the document. So the key for that is more or less getting persons again, bring about the exposing the benefits of sport, being physically active, understanding physical literacy as well, and getting persons again to become involved in sport. The key for that, we would have engaged some past national athletes as well. They were used as ambassadors, so they can now give their experience of what sport would have done for them and understand how they can also get involved in sport and understand the careers that are available in sport. So that's what we did through the I Choose Sport program. That program is currently under review, so we are waiting on that review for the program. But it has been very, very beneficial with regards to getting persons more involved in sport again at the secondary school level.
Okay, so in general, the criteria, the eligibility criteria really is what the Ministry of Education advise.
Yes, based on the schools in need of focus initiative.
And I guess, Chair, through you, PS.
Just one question. When you say it's under review, is it to modify or to discontinue?
Yeah, so currently, since the ministry has been now become Sport and Youth Affairs, and with the new mandate, over the last few months we've been looking very strongly in terms of programming, and all of the programs have been under review. We have a slate of programs which are carded to start in January 2026. And so this one is also one of them. So all of the programs we have been relooking. And I just want to mention two of the things that under the current leadership of our minister, some of the things that you have raised here today is exactly what we are looking at. One focus is in terms of sustainability and the need to look at what happens after the program is finished, what happens to the participants, where do they go next, what's the structure that we have both within the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs and Sport TT, for example, in terms of a structure to ensure that, one, the populations that we are looking at in terms of the vulnerable, in terms of disabled, inclusion, and so on, women and girls, all of that's taken into account. And so there's a pathway beyond that. So there's a very strong focus on that. The second thing that we're doing, which you alluded to earlier, is like, what's the connection in terms of the vulnerable, in terms of Ministry of Education and schools and sporting. And so the next thing that the ministry under the current minister, we have a very strong focus on, which is still being developed, is including under like the national service part, a mechanism where what happens in school and in the sporting and in the community, that there could be some sort of collaboration to be able to address that, so that information from one area will impact on the intervention in another area. So, for example, if you have someone who might be delinquent in school, can we get them into sports in the school or in the community? And can their mentors be provided? Can there be assistance for the family? So that's something that we're working on, which will come a little later on. But I just wanted to let you know that the programs are not really under review to just stop or go or no go, but really to examine them in terms of monitoring and evaluation, in terms of impact and outcomes for the community and for the vulnerable. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You kind of preempted one of my points, which is the collaboration between the different ministries, especially Ministry of Education with the I Choose Sport. So I just wanted reassurance that that communication is happening, and it seems to be on the agenda, at least to address that. Could you provide a list of the programs to be launched in January to us in writing?
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you. Now, one of the things that's coming up is funding and financial strain for these sports in the vulnerable youths. So, Dr. Dowlath, did you have a question about that?
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to welcome all of the participants. One of the things from the reports is that there was a note that economic factors in terms of funding for clubs and even for the ministry for some of these programs. And my question to the committee here is, what is the status of that engagement, especially with those companies that have CSR policies? Are there any such sponsorships or partnerships currently in place with the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs and any of these companies in the community?
Thank you very much for that question, sir. So yes, funding has been, the funding allocation has reduced quite considerably. I mean, I remember in 2015 financial year, I think we had about $53 million as the allocation for the contribution to non-profit institutions, which would be the boat from which we provide grants to national governing bodies, community sporting groups, elite athletes, individuals, etc. The current allocation this year is at 13 million, right? So that just shows and they would have been lower at some point, and we would have actually had to transfer money in to be able to boost that vote. So that vote has suffered quite a bit over the years. What we have been able to do is try to encourage our national governing bodies to become a lot more self-sustaining. And through the compliance documents that we ask for from those national governing bodies, it helps to give them a certain element of strategic direction and to boost the strategic outlook of the national governing bodies to be able to approach the private sector in a much more a much stronger way, in a way in which they are able to really show what they do and how their vision for the development of the sport would be. As it relates to ministry programs, the programs of the Ministry of Sport, we have been able to access some partnerships over the years with Subway, for example, the virtual race program that we would have had under what would have been called the Pink Rain campaign for women and girls in sport. Subway would have been very, very instrumental in assisting the Girls Run TT program, as it would have been called then. And we are actually in talks with the marketing personnel from Nestle as it relates to supporting some of the programs that we have coming on board from January. So there are areas where we have been able to get some level of private sector support. It's something we are looking to improve on in terms of how it is we engage the private sector to be able to support the programs that we do in the ministry, but also encouraging the national governing bodies as well to be able to improve how they are able to meet the private sector in such a way whereby the buy-in is much more improved. Oh, Shell as well. Yes, thanks very much for that, PS. Shell is another Shell is another company who would have met with us. That would have been August this year. Yes, in August this year, and Shell would have reached out to us in terms of getting some programs done in Mayaro, right, in the Mayaro community. So yes, Shell is another. We want to leave them out at all. And actually, we would have had some collaboration with UTC, and well, sport company would have been able to take better advantage of that as it relates to like financial literacy workshops that would have been done for national governing bodies and for athletes as well.
Thank you.
There's a follow-up question.
Certainly, but I just wanted to bring in Mr. McKellar because I know the Ministry of Education has an Adopt a School program, so I don't know if can be some sort of collaboration or information sharing between your ministry and Ministry of Sport as to how that might work.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is the Adopt a School initiative, which we are actually trying to re-energize to encourage greater participation among the private sector for supporting schools. As you correctly mentioned, there are resource challenges that confront all of the public service, not just Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, but also the Ministry of Education. And even as we try to improve the facilities and the plant at various schools, and particularly in the area of sporting and cultural facilities, school halls, the Adopt a School will really provide an avenue, a mechanism whereby private sector organizations can make direct contributions to outfitting schools with that kind of equipment that they require.
Thank you. Member Dowlath.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier, it was indicated that the youths who would have passed through the programs from the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs would be guided towards the clubs in the communities. And so on average, they leave schools probably about 17, 18. But your submissions would have also highlighted that there was difficulty in engaging youths between the ages of 19 to 25. So I want to ask about if there are any pilot initiatives that the ministry would have in terms of that are designed to attract that age cohort, because you indicated also that you were supporting the clubs and in administration and all those kinds of things. So how attractive would these clubs and these institutions be in terms of from your support for that particular cohort?
At this time, we don't have anything on the cards as it relates to that specific cohort and sport development for that particular cohort. What tends to transpire, though, is that as an athlete develops, they would continue along with high performance clubs and that are under the specific national governing body. And at that stage or that age range, you're talking about persons who, honestly, it's either you're at a high performance level or you're just kind of staying at just under that or at recreation. So, and that becomes the smaller percentile of the participating population in sport. So you tend to find that at that age, as I said, it's either high-level competitive, mid-range competitive, or you're playing sport for recreation. And then, of course, at that age range as well, you have a lot of athletes who would leave to go on to pursue studies or are looking for work as well. And those would be reasons why you'll have some level of attrition at that age in terms of participating in sporting programs. So, of course, at that particular stage in life, the focus tends to be a lot different. And the ability to target them can be a little bit different as well. And we rely heavily in that particular space on the community clubs, the community groups, to be able to offer sporting programs or recreation programs rather for that age group to participate. Of course, we, through our grant fund applications process, we support the initiatives of the sporting groups and sporting clubs from communities in that regard.
Thank you. But in terms of training, I mean, you need mentors, coaches, certified persons. So not necessarily participating in sports, but as part of the team. So do you have anything for that age group, which, like you said, this is the age group where they're going off to university and accessing academic careers, maybe in sport?
What we do have would be capacity building programs. So, for example, we would have run in collaboration with the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee over the last 3 years programs for introduction to coaching, as well as sport administration type programs. And the idea behind those programs is to form a base level of capacity that can be used at community level, and of course encouraging them thereafter to access higher level programs through our two main universities that offer sport programs, which would be of course UWI St. Augustine and UTT. So they at that level have certificate into bachelor's, into master's, into PhD programs. So the programs that we offer provide at least a base level of knowledge and expertise that they can use in communities or utilize to step forward in the academic career.
Thanks, because that would be the 19 to 24.
That would be, that is where you will find, even though again, as we said before, we may not necessarily focus on the particular age group, but you will find that persons who are now coming out of sport as a competitive athlete, but probably did not make it at that high level, may seek to start to engage their career in sport from a professional point of view, and those programs tend to offer that opportunity for them to start that process.
Thank you. Member de Nobriga, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to go back to something we were discussing earlier. Mr. McTair, you had spoken about the Shaping Communities program and the Sport for Development and Peace unit in the past tense. Does that program and unit still exist, or do they still exist?
Right. The Shaping Communities program would have been a program under the Division of Physical Education and Sport. And in the revision of programs that we have undergone over the last few months, the particular umbrella program would have been disbanded. However, there would be specific projects under that program that we will continue with. So, for example, the April Pools is one of those programs. We are looking at another program for persons with disabilities to facilitate inclusion, and that is something that would have been done under Shaping Communities before. That is being looked at and developed as we speak. And, well, of course, the water polo program I alluded to that will commence in the July-August vacation would have been under that Shaping Communities banner, but it will be a standalone program going forward. The Sport for Development and Peace unit, that particular unit would have been looked at, and it was seen as not being viable to continue the particular unit. So it's something that I think we can still discuss going along in future, considering the importance of attempting to meet vulnerable youth, because that would have been the particular focus of that unit. The sport division, yes, we do programs that will affect persons who are considered vulnerable in communities. However, it's not necessarily the absolute focus at this time. So it will be something that we will surely go back, discuss, and see if it's possible for that unit to be reinstated.
Chair, do you mind a follow-up? So, again, coming back to the reason that we're here today and speaking about sporting programs in diverting vulnerable youths from delinquency and criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago, I would like to know from Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs now. So you had a unit that specifically addressed what we are talking about today. And it has been seen as not viable, right? Chair, I'm not going to get into the conversation as to why it is not viable. Maybe that can be at a future date or by thing, but I don't see that that is applicable in this conversation right now. But you would have had programs like the Let's Talk Sport for Peace, your social cohesion and peace building. You had various, your street games. In the absence of the unit, what happens to initiatives like those and programs like those?
Yeah, so I just want to say that prior to this, remember that there were different ministries. So now we have sport and youth together, and some of the goals and aims that would be under these would also fall under the youth division. And so, as I indicated earlier, what we are doing is trying to see how best, as I said in my early statement, in terms of synergies between the two. So some of the goals and the approaches that we'll be taking under, for example, national service, which is like your holistic development to ensure values and so on for youth, will also be captured under some of those same initiatives that would have been under this department. So what has happened recently is that the way in which the sport division was structured was recently changed. And so right now we are rebuilding all of the different areas to ensure that there is cohesiveness, that some of the goals from one area wouldn't necessarily be duplicated in another area. So I think in a few months we'll be able to say definitely how some of the same goals of that unit would be transitioned under the new structure and the new ministry now.
Chair, can I then ask the PS, when was this unit disbanded?
Okay, thank you. I'm just asking because I'm new to the ministry as well.
I know that.
Yeah. So I think as of the start of the new ministry would have been fully integrated October 1st, so I think it would have been from the end of September.
Okay, so PS, I come back to what my question was, and I asked it specifically because your Director of Physical Education and Sport would have spoken about an overarching program being ended, but specific initiatives that fell under that program continuing. So the unit has been disbanded as at October 1st or end of September. Are there any of those initiatives that were continued in the same way that initiatives under the Shaping Communities program were continued?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, and so you've given us a projection of a few months, right, for programs that would achieve these goals, which again, I remind everyone that's why we're here today. Can you give us any sort of a specific time as to whether a replacement overarching program, a replacement unit, when we can look forward to the actual initiatives being commenced?
So we are beginning initiatives as early as January. So there's a plan of work for this coming year. And specifically with respect to some of those, as I said, we are looking at a broader umbrella because we also have to look, if you're looking at vulnerable youth, it's not just sporting, right? There are other aspects which you would want to address in different ways. So I think by Q2, over the next quarter, so we are rolling out a whole set of programs from January. We have the next quarter that we have already planned. So I would think by second quarter, calendar year 2026, we'll be able to give a more definite, right?
Can I ask again, because of the targeted nature of programs like the ones that fell under the Sport Development and Peace Unit, I know at the Ministry of Education, there were those 106 schools of focus that were both primary and secondary. Will there be any interaction between the Ministry of Education, specifically with these 106 schools of focus, and these programs when it comes to participation of youths who may be deemed as vulnerable to moving to a program where you are talking about life skills, you are speaking about sport for development? I want to tell you, Director, I will be using that at some point. Is there going to be an interaction between the ministries and also, if to P.S. McKellar, would there be room, or would the expectation is that you would have the Student Support Services Division directly involved in that, because they would also know those at-risk students that would be in those schools of focus?
Chair, through you, the member's question is an interesting one, given that, yes, given that the Minister of Education, who determines policy, is in the room. But I think
he will not ask you those. Yes, he will not ask you those questions. I will.
But I think, given the target audience that we are dealing with today, the vulnerable youth, the Ministry of Education will certainly entertain any intervention from its brother and sister ministries towards addressing this particular target group. Again, there are a host of vulnerabilities, right? Some of which may not result in delinquency, but certainly we recognize that there are students who are vulnerable to possible delinquent outcomes, and to the extent that sporting initiatives can assist in concert with other interventions, the Ministry of Education, I believe, will certainly be open to discussing and supporting.
Chair, just one last thing. P.S., as a member of Parliament that has one of those schools of focus in my own constituency, I ask you to please ensure that programs like these are put on the front burner. We do benefit from the work of the Ministry of Sport on Winnie Fitzwilliam Boulevard. There's the Diego Martin Swimming Pool, and the Diego Martin Central Secondary School has a water polo team and has a very active swim team that does very well. So we do see the synergy between the ministries and how it impacts our community. But there is a gap that exists right now, and in our last sitting, Chair, we did identify, particularly with representatives from the Student Support Services Division, that we do have these students that we do need to speak to and to speak with. So I ask you to please make that a priority at the ministry.
Yeah. So I just want to indicate that, for example, Sport TT will be rolling out programs from January throughout the country, both at the primary and secondary schools, in terms of football, track and field, cricket. And so schools within all categories will be captured. And so that's something, we can look more closely at in terms of the specific schools that are being looked at. But I just want you to know that there will be sporting activity in those schools. Secondly, with respect to, even though, so as I indicated, now that the Ministry is Sport and Youth Affairs, even though the vulnerable, the at-risk, we may not have sporting programs or a unit for sport. For example, in January, at the end of January, we are launching what we call the Civic Engagement Leadership Academy, which is looking again at life skills and values and so on for youth. We also have other youth programs that are starting in January as well. So I just want you to know that because of how the ministry is structured now, we can take a holistic approach to at-risk and vulnerable groups, delinquency, all of those things that we can, look at it not just from the sporting side, but definitely in terms of other needs that they may have in terms of jobs and training and all the other aspects. So I indicated earlier that we are taking a total look at how the ministries function and how we could address, these needs in a more holistic manner and a sustainable way then, so that the impact of one will feed into the other and so on. So even though it may not have that particular team or group, it's not that those that particular target group will not be addressed by the ministry. We are very strong in terms of focus, and from January you will see in other areas in training and so on that we have ways in which we are going to engage with that same group. So I just want to give you that assurance.
Thank you very much for that answer. As a follow-up to that, the cricket, for example, was oversubscribed, the cricket program. So clearly there are some activities that generate more interest than others. And so my question is, and I'm sure Minister Ratiram will have a follow-up, is one, how do you identify which programs are likely to generate more interest? And how do you identify the vulnerable youths as early as possible so that they can participate and hopefully their trajectory is changed from an early stage?
So I will just start by saying one of the things that the ministry itself does, which is what the division does, is that's why we would introduce such as the water polo, badminton. So new sports are identified like in small programs to gauge the interest. I think they started with cheerleading, which ended up being very successful, and that program will be run again from March to May. And so you had groups that were successful and entered into the national competition and so on based on it. So what the ministry does is basically introduce, get an idea of new sports, different areas, and try to develop the interest. And then from there now, you can do a more sustainable or long-term program or roll it out in a larger way. So that's one of the things that is being done. So each year they will try new programs, different sports, different locations as well. So for example, I think with the water polo, one of the things we discussed was that mainly in the Northwest, you have most of the teams there participate in the schools. So the goal is to look for South and the East, Tobago, different places that now you can introduce that to see if you can get the same level of participation. And then from there, like Sport TT will do the bigger programs, the major rollouts. So, but I will turn over now to Jason.
So, Chair, coming back to your question, how do we identify what programs to choose? We look at the, national participation. When we looked at, for this particular cycle, we know that cricket, football, and athletics would give you the biggest coverage in terms of a base of participants. Ideally, we would like to do more sports, but given the finite resources that we have, we felt that this year we could proceed with cricket, football, and athletics.
Thank you, folks. So just following up from the conversation, in terms of the excess demand, as you would have indicated in your submissions, where there was an estimate at an average of over 10% over the prescribed number of registrants. So we had over subscription of youths wanting to get involved into like the cricket camp, as an example. What systems do you all have in place to manage these high interests where youths are oversubscribed? Is there relationships with private clubs or other programs to pick up that so that no youth is basically left behind?
So I'll go back to the program that we had in July, August this year. We did actively also engage with corporate Trinidad to try to get some sponsorships as well. We were able to successfully get all the water for the camps. We partnered with one of the entities to provide the snacks for the camps. So where we were able to save on budgets in one scenario, we were able to allow for no one to be left behind in those camps. So we do have an active corporate plan this fiscal year. Through the board and through our management team, we are going to engage corporate Trinidad to try to come on board and partner with us. And once we're able to get partnerships and sponsorships, we will be able to, as best as we can, not allow anyone to be left behind.
And would that include partnering also with like those private training facilities, private clubs, beyond what we have readily available?
Most of our partnership is already done through the NGB, because we can't leave the NGBs out, because this is also a development platform as well. But definitely is something that we will consider.
All right, and I want to focus, Chair, on some of the challenges being faced in the rural communities. Director was referring earlier to programs like the introduction to coaching and so forth. In the rural communities, in your submissions, mentioned that Sports for Development and Peace Unit and the non-governing bodies are sometimes unable to get staff in rural communities. It is therefore evident that the capacity building initiative target rural communities are absolutely necessary to ensure that there are homegrown coaches with skills required to support the camp's implementation. Can you indicate the reason for the staffing shortage in these rural communities?
Most rural communities tend to be, unfortunately, underserved. My apologies. Most rural communities tend to be a bit underserved in terms of the higher level capacity building that could be done due to the fact that access is the issue. Being able to leave their community to go out to the more urban areas where courses are held and that kind of stuff tends to be difficult. It tends to be very cost prohibitive in many instances. And that's why, as a ministry, we try to, as best as possible, carry programs to those communities where capacity building is concerned, so that in boosting the capacity in those rural areas, it allows them to be a lot more empowered to be able to engage sport programs at a higher level. So you may tend to find there may be someone who would have participated in a particular sport at a particular level, and they see the interest in providing services, but it may not be at the level that would allow for or engender high-level sport development, because they just don't have the necessary capabilities to do so. So we try to meet that gap as best as we possibly can, as our resources would allow.
Thank you for that information. Continuing with what you would have submitted as well, in these rural communities, participants are often unable to attend camp every day due to what is referred to as the socio-economic circumstances, resulting in lower participation number within the communities. Also, the lack of basic sporting equipment in these rural communities resulted in, can you indicate if the lack and the socioeconomic circumstances has resulted in participants' exclusion, injury risk, or reduced engagement
you may have some of that taking place within particular sports. There are sports such as track and field where the equipment is relatively minimal, and as such, you tend to find in some rural areas track and field is a sport that is played at a higher level because it's a lot less costly to do so. There's a lot less equipment involved, so that it allows for participation. We try as best as we possibly can to support communities as it relates to ensuring that there is some level of participation and continued participation through the programs that we're able to introduce as a ministry and through the sports company as well, but also through supporting the clubs and any institutions in those communities through grant funding.
And can you say if the ministry has considered like the program that encourage business within the communities to adopt a sporting team? I can say the Ministry of Education adopt a school program as means of encouraging greater corporate sector support, private sector participation from within those communities?
It is something that we can definitely put some focus on. It's not something we have actually done, but we can definitely put some focus on that.
Okay.
Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to chime in on a question that was asked by the member previously regarding the lack of coaching support in some of the rural areas.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Right. The Ministry of Education is presently deep into discussions with the Inter-American Development Bank for a pilot project that addresses greater inclusion in track and field in rural schools, promoting greater activity in schools that haven't had a high participation rate in sport, in promoting greater activity amongst girls and students with disabilities. One of the key components of that program will be to train local coaches in those rural areas and provide at least tier 2, I believe, certification. So invariably, we'll be assisting our brother ministry in having a pool of coaches that they could tap into in future. And it's a pilot program where we'll be targeting 5 schools in rural Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, PS. And I just want to also continue with respect to the socioeconomic circumstances in the rural communities and the nutritional deficiencies observed amongst participants. Has this been formally assessed for their impact on performance, concentration, and program retention? And is there any plans to provide nutritionist, dietitian support for these communities and these programs to assist the youths?
That question is directed to Sport and Youth Affairs or Ministry of Education. So, which?
No. I think it's from a sports standpoint. We'll deal with the nutritional deficiencies observed amongst participants and what kind of support system that we are looking at to assist these younger folks or these participants with the challenges that they may face, specifically those in the rural communities experiencing the socioeconomic circumstances.
So thank you for that question. So one of the things that is done both by the ministry and by Sport TT is really provision of meals. And I think just in terms of observation, the staff mentioned that part of the reason for participation is because when school might be closed and so on, that the programs also provide a way that they can get meals during the vacation period and so on. So one of the things that's done by the ministry is, as far as is possible, transportation through the buses and then provision of meals. Right, in some instances they will get other things like T-shirts and different things that might incentives and so on to be able to participate. So again, in terms of the follow-up, one of the things that which we've been having discussions on currently again, and this is more now in terms of the competitive athletes, really is in terms of, how can we increase, and that's something the minister has been looking at sourcing resources that may be available within the university, within, different things like the Defense Force and so on, in terms of some of those professionals like the nutritionists and other types of professionals which would help athletes. So that's something that I know is currently being discussed, but not generally, more so for those who are in competitive sport in terms of enhancing their performance, right? But there are other ways, and we can continue to look at it to see how best, we can provide the resources for the rural communities and those with socioeconomic challenges to be able to participate in sport.
Thank you. As you mentioned economic challenges, I wanted to touch on oversight of funds granted to sporting bodies. So the submission outlined in detail the mechanisms to ensure that the state allocations are utilized and there's accountability. But my question is, has the ministry encountered any challenges in ensuring accountability for the funding allocated to various bodies, as well as in obtaining the required documentation from athletes?
Thank you very much, Chair, for that question. The ministry, we try as best as possible to ensure that the reporting processes are followed as it relates to the disbursement of any grants, and that would be to any of the entities that receive grants, being either elite athletes, individuals, or sporting organizations, being national governing bodies and community sporting organizations. While we do have the issue of staff to be able to go out, we have a dearth of staff, so that that makes it a bit improbable to be able to go to every single group that we provide funding to follow up to make sure that they are indeed utilizing the funds the way that they would have asked for or requested. We still do try as best as we can to be able to ensure that there is some on-site monitoring of the events that the funding would have been granted for. Also, we do encourage the groups to provide their report, and of course, if it is a report is not provided, the funding is not issued to the particular group if they return to the ministry to request funds for another follow-up project or a project afterwards. And that we have a very strict focus on. So with national governing bodies, we do have a very strong compliance regime that we execute every year, where the national governing body has to report, including with audited financial statements for monies received from the ministry, but also to ensure that their operations are being done within the tenets of good governance. And individuals, similarly, that will follow exactly what we said as it relates to, as it relates to the sporting organizations, whereby if it is they do not provide the necessary reporting documents, then any subsequent request for funding is not going to be looked at. So that's very clear. I mean, it's stated any entity receiving funding from the ministry has to sign on to a reporting requirements document. So it's very clearly stated what is required of these organizations to report on the money disbursed to them.
So are you saying that all the organizations are up to date and compliant?
No, I would not say that. So as it relates to national governing bodies, we do have a number of national governing bodies that have not maintained a level of compliance. Again, if there is not compliance, then they are not funded, right? We would not we would not consider a request for funding from an organization that is not compliant with the ministry's requirements or have not provided the necessary reporting of a grant that would have been previously disbursed. And the same would apply for any entity that would have received a grant. So
Including athletes.
Including athletes. So while we may not be able to get all reports, we do note which are those organizations or entities, including individuals, that may not have provided reporting of the grants received, and we will manage any subsequent funding requests accordingly.
Thank you. I really wanted to ask Mr. Dyer, in terms of social services, about the early identification of at-risk youths and how you deal with this, because the earlier we identify and direct them through these programs, the better.
A pleasant good morning again, Chair. Well, good day, sorry. So at Student Support Services, we deal with the referred students. So once students are earmarked, whether by teachers, principals, concerned persons, a referral is done to us at Student Support Services, and through our assessment, we would then identify if the student is really at risk, and more or less assess what level of risk as well, and what type of interventions are needed.
And has this been effective in early identification and support for vulnerable students?
For the most part, yes, it has been. Through all the programs that we more or less have available, through our guidance units.
Can you give any anecdotal evidence to support that it's been effective, or do you have any data that you can provide?
In your submission to us at page 7, where in answer to question, 4A, speaking about integration within the student support framework, if I read from your submittal, starts at line 3 in 4A. For students who may struggle academically, and Chair, this is speaking to what you just spoke about. For students who may struggle academically, structured sporting programs offer a constructive means of maintaining engagement, fostering self-esteem, and reinforcing positive behavior. So we established that at the school level, the student support framework has a critical role, and that may well include children who are deemed, whether it is in class or by the professionals, to be at risk or delinquent. Can I ask how does the ministry assess, particularly within the framework of what we're discussing here, how does the ministry assess the effectiveness of that integration of children into organized sporting activity?
Through you, Chair. And really, this is a question that I would divert to Mr. Dyer. But the fact is that from as early as the early childhood education sector, there is tracking of all our students when they register, and there is some kind of metric that would indicate the various levels of vulnerability. Let us take, for example, a student who is probably in the secondary school sector, let us say Form 4, and that person, comes up as having a particular issue. It might be an issue of truancy, indiscipline in the classroom. As Mr. Dyer indicated, certainly there will be a reference to the school social worker. It may be to the guidance officer, as the case might be. And there begins treatment, or some mechanism to manage and improve the situation. When we speak about structured sporting programs, there may or may not be a particular structured, organized program in the school that is either tailored specifically to the student. If we recognize in interactions with the student and the student's parent guardians that the student does possess sporting athletic acumen, certainly there's a recommendation to become more involved, whether it's in the school football team, the school cricket, basketball, badminton, as the case might be, because as the response stated, we do recognize that involvement in sporting activity, particularly competitive sport, breeds a level of discipline, time management, self-esteem, development of social skills. But specific to your question about being able to determine the effectiveness and the outcomes, I will divert to Mr. Dyer.
Thank you, Piers. And just to answer your question, just to add a little more to what my peers would have mentioned, through our assessment, we also look at the assessment of social functioning. We look at how our referred clients, they function in their environment. We look at the family history. We look at the communities they come from. We look at if there was any sort of developmental delays or challenges. We look at if there's any hereditary disabilities, any sort of challenges there as well. And one of the areas of the form that really help us a lot as it relates to sports and any extra co-curricular activities is we ask the students and we ask their parents, depending on who we do in the intake with, if there's any sort of involvement apart from just the academics. So it kind of helps us guide them somewhat if there's special interest. So some schools may not have the extra and the co-curricular activities, but because we work in partnership with some of the state agencies, we are able to now refer them to the agencies, and some might be community-based, some might just be some of the private, clubs, whether it's football, running, athletics, stuff like that. I hope that answers the question.
Well, Mr. Dyer, what you've told me does bodes well, but I suppose I'm speaking here really about utilization of sport in particular, and I understand the other things as a behavior modification tool especially for delinquent students. And both you and your peers have preempted the second question, which would have been what challenges you all may face, right, from in terms of implementing sport as a behavior modification tool across the board in all your schools. But you've given a wide-ranging answer. I think I really wanted to find out, in terms of sport, how do you assess from the ministry the integration or the effectiveness of the integration of sport as a behavior modification tool for students that may come under your charge at Student Support Services?
Well,
sorry. I'm listening to the question, member, and I wish I could have said we could give you a list of the number of souls saved. And I think even Chair might have been hinting at that, whether anecdotal or hard data that says we had X number of students in 2021 who had come under our radar for attention, and we were able to guide and direct them to sporting activities, and they were transformed, and they've on a straight path now. That hard data probably does not exist, but it certainly does point us in a direction. As Mr. Dyer said, the guidance officers, the counselors may recommend, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's ultimately up to the parent, the guardians, to see to it that the children become active in the particular sporting program where they exist. And even so, as you also indicated, there are multiplicity of factors that would contribute to a particular outcome. Some of the sporting activities, as we indicated, requires significant resources to participate. For someone, even if they have the talent and the skill to be actively involved in cricket, the cost of basic cricket kit could be prohibitive, right? Even for the swimmers, a good Speedo and cap could be a challenge, right? And that's just a couple of the factors that could limit. But we are at it. We are at it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that answer, which is where probably the adopter school and those programs come in. But I wanted to focus again on the delinquent students who may be underperforming in the classroom. They have come to the attention of the student support services, and they are now maybe student athletes. So therefore, if they have to participate in sport, that may impact on their classroom activity, which may be counterproductive. So what I want to know is, for those students who have potential and who wish to pursue sports and which may be behavior modifying, what support is there for those students in terms of the classroom that will not make them fall further behind because they're taking an active interest in sport?
Thank you, Member. I think in our response, on our written responses, we did indicate, well, anecdotally, that from all reports and observations, our student athletes in general tend to be able to manage that schoolwork, sport life balance pretty well. For the student athlete who, let us say, during the height of the football season, has to either practice or attend matches, there is support from their fellow students, from faculty to provide class notes. There may be extension of deadlines to submit responses, research projects. So there is that. As it relates specifically to the vulnerable student, we probably don't have that information specifically, but could speak to the student athlete's ability to manage and the support generally.
Thank you. You also mentioned in your submission that teachers who support school sports do so in addition to teaching full-time timetable loads. And this often results in teachers limiting their availability for sports support or event supervision to carry out their regular assigned teaching duties. So are there mentors that can support the teachers or supplement the limited available of teachers to supervise sports events?
Okay, I'll bring in our curriculum coordinator, Ms. King, who is responsible for phys ed.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So we do have a challenge where teachers support sport at the school level, but this support is on a voluntary basis, whether it's done at the school level or whether it's done to support the school's national sporting organizations' activities. Quite often, teachers are overburdened with their regularly scheduled timetables as well as the support for sport, and we did indicate in our submission that they often become overburdened and opt out of that support. At the school level, we know that in some cases, the physical education unit at the schools, they would use students, maybe the older students who have who perhaps are doing physical education at the CSEC level, they will use their services to assist in the management of various school sporting activities. But that can go so far. In terms of a sustained approach, I'm not sure exactly what happened at the school, but this is an approach that some schools use to support the management of sport at the school level.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that leads me on. I see here that at CSEC, the number of students who are attempting the exams has been steadily increasing. The number of students at CSEC at Cape in physical education and sports, and that the pass rate is quite high, or the failure rate is quite low. So that is good that they can apply.
Yes.
So I suppose, is that built into the syllabus where they are assisting the school with physical education, but it's also part of the curriculum?
Well, in terms of assisting the school, not particularly. The curriculum, the syllabus at the CSEC level has a component at the exam paper 3, where the class puts on a competition, and each student must assume a particular role, like a sporting role that would support their development in terms of sport management, competition management, and so on. So it provides them those kinds of skills for future. But in terms of the actual management of the school sports, that's as far as they do.
So could this be part of school-based assessments?
Well, yes, it actually is, in terms of the roles that they perform to support school sport for a competition, but it's not a formal in terms of the school system, but it's for the SBE, if I'm clear.
Okay. All right, thank you. Did anybody else have any questions?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs. When we look at your submissions, we are seeing that there's always this lack of data to inform policy decisions. It's compulsory for young people to attend school up to the age 16. So baseline data is available from the Ministry of Education going into when they transition out of, let's say, secondary schools. So I wanted to ask the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs, is there any relationship in terms of with the Ministry of Education where you have an MOU where you, especially for the vulnerable students, but also too for those students who, every child who is involved in sport and has to play a sport for a school is registered through the Ministry of Education, and you have all that data. Does that data flow up from the Ministry of Education? Because I asked an earlier question about the vulnerable between 19 to 25. About 18,000 youths move out of the secondary school every year. So if you say that's about 6 years between, that's about 108,000 that you're looking at. So you have that access to that base. Do you have access to that baseline data? Is there any relationship with the Ministry of Education, or is there any intention to do that? So it's not nebulous in terms of who would be the vulnerable, who are these people. It will be very targeted, and you will also have that background data. Of course, there must be some security measures in terms of you cannot share personal information without some kind of agreement. But it's a question I wanted to ask, and there was another question when we spoke about water sports, about water polo. And recently I saw this uptake with dragon boat racing in the country, and it's really participation from throughout the country, not just in the Northwest. So it's that kind of information in terms of new sports, and also too in the kind of baseline data that will inform all of these programs that were asked by my colleagues before in terms of targeted interventions, because I'm seeing there are lots of pilot projects that we on, but data-driven decision-making, is it now that we can focus in a relationship between Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs and the Ministry of Education to get more detailed data so that you could have more targeted interventions?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And That is a very good point, and those are some of the things that we are in discussion now. With respect to the youth aspect, I think in terms of monitoring and evaluation, I think the ministry is a little bit more advanced, and as you said, they are now building out the sport aspect, and so collaboration with the Ministry of Education, not just in terms of implementation, but in terms of actual data and intervention, I think is something that we'll be looking at.
Chair, I just have one follow-up question. I noticed in your submissions, Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs, that you supported 30 schools in terms of their sports days. Ministry of Education would have indicated they're responsible for physical and developing the learners, but bringing them together in that atmosphere of camaraderie and all of the values and things like that. Is there any intention to expand that? Because, it will be a measurable outcome on a sports day when you measure participation, even the cheerleaders and those in the audience, like when you go to a football match, those who are there attending, they have the love for the sport, so it's quite effective. A sports day in a school builds that kind of love and patriotism. So I noted that you all supported 30 of them. Is there any intention to increase that? Because then, I think that will actually support a lot of the initiatives that you all are speaking about. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again. And yes, the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs do actively encourage schools to apply for support. And that is something that, yes, we'll be doing in terms of expansion and support for sports days and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to move on to some internal ministry issues, particularly funding. Mr. McTeer mentioned that funding for the ministry has declined from 53 million some years ago to 13 million for fiscal year 26. And I think Sport TT has been allocated $25 million. So in terms of human resource and financial challenges, how will these be addressed and rectified?
Yes, so as permanent secretary, that's one of the things that they're doing on an every day. And so we have, we have to be prudent in terms of how the resources are allocated, and that's part of the reasons why we are relooking a lot of the programs to try to see how best we can use the funding that was allocated. The other thing that we are doing is really looking overall throughout the ministry to see where we can, where possible, sometimes it's possible to move funding so that we, depending on where the need is, and then we also have the mechanism through mid-year review where we can apply for additional funding. Of course, we have to utilize in a proper way the funding that we do have now to ensure that when we ask, that will be allocated. So it's something that is done on a day-to-day basis. In terms of salaries, we are covered in terms of salaries. However, the additional funding, because it's not just the programs, we also have infrastructure that the ministry is responsible for. And so therefore, we work best to see how we can meet the needs with what we have first, and then to see what mechanisms we can use to get more funding.
Yeah. And I suppose you will liaise closely with the Ministry of Rural Development and, is it local government? In terms of infrastructure?
Well, we have a number of different ways that we manage with the infrastructure. So we have executing bodies which will do the project management for us, such as UDICOT, other agencies that, sports company as well, so that will actually manage the projects. And but I don't start off by saying, yes, we have a little funding, but whatever we do have, we have to ensure that we utilize it properly first, and then, we will see how we can supplement that.
If I can just add to that, Chair, and these fundings for like the maintenance of the sports facility would be these facilities under the Ministry of Sports and Sports TT, not particularly those under local government like recreational grounds, etc.
Yeah. So there are specific
facilities.
Specific facilities. Some of the stadia, the swimming pools, then on the youth side we also have youth facilities as well that the ministry manages.
Is there a collaborative effort between the sports ministry and local government and also education? Because in education, there are several schools with recreational grounds, recreational facilities that after school close, it remains idle. Saturdays, Sundays, these grounds are all closed up. Is there a collaborative effort between the sports ministry, local government ministries, and the education ministry to efficiently and effectively make proper use of these recreation grounds and recreational areas?
Okay, thanks for that. And at this time, what we have in place is where the Ministry of Local Government would reach out to the Ministry of Sport, and through cabinet decision, certain recreation grounds will be looked at for renovation through the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago. We have not had that type of relationship with the Ministry of Education just yet. I know, and well, of course, P.S. McKellar will be able to speak to this much more elaboratively, but I know there is a facilities unit that tends to manage school-related facilities. As such, we have not had that type of relationship with the Ministry of Education, but with the Ministry of Local Government, yes, there are particular grounds where the regional corporation will reach out to us, and we will support the renovation of those facilities via a cabinet decision.
Well, thanks for that information, but I'm also looking at beyond just the facilities and the maintenance and upgrade of the facilities. I'm specifically looking at the usage, the utilization of the facilities to be able to support the programs, the youth programs that the sports ministry may want to execute, to be able to use. Also, in terms of the communities, the at-risk communities where these vulnerable youths may exist, having these facilities closed up on a weekend when we could make it open and available to the community, the village councils, the youth clubs, the sports clubs, etc., from within the villages. We have clashes that happens in various communities. For example, during the cricket season, the youths in the community want to play small goal, but the pitch is prepared or the ground is prepared for cricket. And you may find the cricket team from within the village and the footballers, those who into footballs. We have problems that there's always a need to have access for these facilities to execute sports program and to execute opportunities then for these younger ones. So I think, it's something that we should look at, having that collaborative effort with these various agencies so that the facilities don't just remain idle, but we put it into efficient and effective usage.
In terms of structured programs from the ministry, yes, we do have that collaboration that takes place. I thought you were more focused on the maintenance of the facilities and the renovation, but as it relates to usage, yes, there are, as we roll out programs, or we plan programs rather, and we identify the communities where those programs will be held, we always look at, of course, the facilities under the Ministry of Sports. We look at the facilities under Sports Company that can be used for those purposes. And then from there, we would reach out to the regional corporations to be able to utilize those facilities. And if necessary, we do reach out to the schools through the Office of the CEO to be able to utilize any school facilities as well. So there are programs that I can identify where we have utilized a school for the execution of those programs. And of course, we also utilize community development facilities also. Yeah, I know Mr. McKellar had a contribution.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Ministry of Education, as just indicated, does entertain requests from the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs and any number of other organizations who may wish to utilize the school facilities for particular activities. So we stand committed to continuing with that once all the relevant criteria and requirements are met. In conversation with the Minister of Education, I do know that he has a strong concern for the quality and upgrading the standards of our sport fields. Because again, yes, you would like to have more cricket, yes, you would like to have more football, but you need to have fields that are in tip-top condition. So I suppose one of the areas that the Ministry of Education can collaborate with either Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, Sport, TT, and even local governments and other entities, is how we could collaborate to improve the quality of the playing fields and any other physical infrastructure that we may have, because that will be a critical input into effectiveness and proper usage.
Thank you. We're looking to wrap up in a bit, so just a few more questions. Madam PS, you mentioned that you were reviewing all the policies and programs. Could you indicate when that's expected to be completed?
Well, at least for the next quarter, we'll be, from January to March, we'll be continuing with that. We are starting the programming, as I said, and launching some programs in January, but there are a few others which we are still reviewing. We've looked at them and asked for, some additional work to be done. And so we expect within the next quarter that we'll be able to complete those.
Thank you. One of the other things that was mentioned earlier is the need, you mentioned mentors and successful athletes. Is there any, are there any challenges in recruiting mentors, coaches, or volunteers to assist with your programs? And what strategies are in place to retain or to engage these mentors?
Yeah, so we have a sport ambassador program between the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, but I think there's also a level now which is being managed by the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs as well. So we have, so athletes are engaged through that program officially in terms of providing mentorship and also being the face of sport for the youth in Trinidad and Tobago, but also for Trinidad and Tobago internationally as well. All right, so I'll ask the director to add.
Well, I will pass on to Mrs. Hoyt Sanchez as it relates to the I2 Sport program and the ambassadors they had under that program.
Okay, so through the I2 Sport program, as I would have mentioned, we would have used past national athletes to be brand ambassadors for the I2 Sport program. They were paid a minimum stipend for each school visit they would have done or each community visit they would have done, whereby they will, of course, give all their experiences and work with the athletes, mentoring the athletes as well, or the participants from the caravan with regards to the importance of becoming involved in sport and the avenues that they can take as it relates to sport. So we did have those brand ambassadors through the I2 Sport program.
So are these long-term or are they just drop in, drop out short-term? I mean, do they have longevity? Because I think one of the things with mentorship is developing a mentor-mentee relationship and consistency, especially in terms of vulnerable youth. So is it a long-term commitment, and what is being done to make it long-term if it's not so?
Well, they would have been able to commit during the program. I guess when PS reviews it, we will know whether we're going to continue on a long-term basis or not.
So do you have any mentors who are long-term?
At the moment, no.
But you were hoping that will be something that you will aspire to?
Yeah, of course. And as Mrs. Hoyt Sanchez would have alluded to, once it is the I2 Sport program is reviewed, and if it is continued, then that would assist in being able to engender that sort of long-term mentor-mentee relationship between the national ambassadors under the I2 Sport program and the athletes. Of course, as it relates to the sport ambassadors under the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, they have we can seek to develop programs where they have a sort of relationship with, I would like to think, national athletes and other high-performing athletes, and maybe we can even drill down to supporting 1 or 2 schools, but I think there are only 3 or 4 of those sport ambassadors at this particular point in time. So that, of course, will make it a bit limited in scope, and these are also active athletes. So they, perform abroad and whatnot. So it's also managing the time that they may be able to dedicate in Trinidad and Tobago in a sustainable way as it relates to mentorship. But I think the I2 Sport program would probably be best positioned once continued to be able to provide that sort of long-term mentorship activity that you're alluding to.
Sorry, so I take it you have plans in place, or you have a strategy to get longevity with these mentors, yes? Because we all agree that that's important.
Yeah, definitely it's important. We recognize that, and we would look to put some things in place where that is concerned.
Okay, well, we're looking to wrap up shortly, so I'm going to ask any members if there are any other questions they'd like to pose. Oh, it looks as though we've exhausted all the questions. So we were thinking that we may have needed another session, but I think we've asked everything that we would like to ask, unless you all want to come back. So I'd just like to invite, in that case, brief closing comments from the permanent secretaries and the Chief Executive Officer of Sport TT.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank you and the members of the committee for your interest and for both the questions and the suggestions that we would have received here today. As we continue to develop and implement the programs, one of the things that I'm committed to do is that in our monitoring and evaluation, we will include an area where we can identify and monitor at-risk, vulnerable delinquent, of course in conjunction with the other agencies who would be well placed to do so. We also will be happy to give you an update maybe in a few months, I would say 4 to 6 months, and some of the things that we are implementing. I just want to emphasize that we have just, the ministry, has just recombined as Sport and Youth Affairs, and so we are actively now really putting together a holistic program, and so in a few months, within the 4 to 6 months, I said, we'll be able to adequately address some of the other concerns that you have that right now may not be actively implemented. So thank you very much.
Thank you for offering to provide that update, Mrs. Bradshaw-Niles, and for that summary. Mr. McKellar?
Thank you, Chair. Again, the Ministry of Education is happy to have been afforded the opportunity to appear before the committee this morning. Although the heavy lifting was done by Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs, we certainly hope that our responses today in session and our written responses will assist the committee in putting forward its recommendations. And we look forward to those as they relate to the Ministry of Education and addressing the target, the focus of this inquiry, the vulnerable youth, I certainly would want, on behalf of my team here, to extend best wishes to the committee and our colleagues for Christmas and for the New Year. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought you would say powerlifting, not heavy lifting. Mr. Williams?
Hi, good afternoon again, everyone. And on behalf of Sport TT, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to answer whatever questions you would have. We take this as an opportunity to learn and to better ourselves. We will continue to work with our line ministry and the Ministry of Education to take some feedback from today as we develop plans and programs going forward. And like my colleague here, I want to wish everyone a very happy and safe Christmas and all the best for 2026.
Okay, well, thank you to officials of the Ministry of Education for your contributions today, and also to the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs and Sport TT. Also to the committee members for your support and participation, and the staff and office of the Parliament for your procedural and logistical support. Thank you also to the viewing and listening audience. And I too wish to extend best wishes for a very happy Christmas and a bright and prosperous 2026. Thank you. Okay, so the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. Can I ask the committee members to stay back for a little summary, very briefly?